tonight on Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell and his guest, Mel Waters, and the story of Mel's Hole, the bottomless pit in Washington State.
I've got Mel on the line. Mel is the guy with the never-ending hole. You really think you've got 80,000?
Yes, yeah, I get line in 5,000-yard spools. I've gone through that many. As usual, I brought the dogs with me. They wouldn't go anywhere near the damn thing, and if I try to bring them there on a leash, they'll just dig their feet in. They do not want to go anywhere near the hole. The one guy claims that he threw his departed canine down into the hole.
Oh, really?
And he swears the dog actually came back to him.
Imagine buying a property and finding a hole in your back garden that's so deep it looks almost bottomless. Then you start to notice some strange things about the hole. Animals won't go near it, birds never fly over it, and it doesn't even have an echo when you shout into it. Then one day, you learn it has the power to cure cancer and bring the dead back to life. This is the story of a man near Ellensburg, Washington, who called into the Art Bell Coast to Coast radio show asking for help with getting to the bottom of the mystery. This would be the first of 5 calls, each one more strange and disturbing than the last, until one day he simply disappeared. Neither he nor the hole have ever been found. Welcome to Paranormal FM, your home of the strange, unexplained, and all things that go bump in the night. If that sounds like the kind of thing you enjoy, then give this episode a like and subscribe for more content. And don't forget to hype this video so others can find the channel. This is a disturbing mystery of Mel's Hole. The hole itself is little more than a local curiosity, at least to begin with. And when Mel Waters buys the property in Monastage Ridge, west of Ellensburg, Washington, the previous owner tells him that the locals have been dumping their rubbish into the hole for decades. Things like dishwashers, broken appliances, and even the occasional dead cow. On first appearance, the hole looks like your typical well. It has a diameter of 9 feet and is surrounded by a 3-foot-high stone retaining wall. The wall extends down into the ground a further 15 feet, but the hole itself goes much deeper. Understandably, Mel isn't keen on the locals using the hole as a dumping ground, but the last thing he wants, just after moving in, is to annoy the locals. But after a while of letting the locals use the hole, he starts to wonder, where does all the rubbish end up? The hole never seems to fill, or even get close to being full. It's like whatever falls into the hole simply disappears. Then one day, after throwing a large fridge freezer into the hole, he realizes that it made no sound as it fell. He didn't even hear it hit the bottom or crash against the sides on its way down. He thought maybe this could be explained by the sheer depth of the hole. But when he shouts into it, there's no echo. It's like shouting into a vacuum. So he gets a powerful halogen light and shines it into the hole, but it doesn't come close to illuminating what is down there. If anything, the hole absorbs the light, the same way it absorbs sound and any items dropped into it. Then he starts noticing other strange things about the hole. The wildlife avoids going near it. Even the birds don't fly over the hole or perch on its wall. And whenever he walks to the hole with his dogs, they dig in their heels as soon as he gets too close, and growl and bark at something invisible in the air. But it isn't just the animals that act strangely. One day he's carrying a portable radio, and as he nears the hole, the signal briefly turns to static before changing to a completely different station. He steps back, and the radio turns back to the previous station. He wonders if this was a one-off. So he walks back to the hole, and just like last time, the radio turns to static, then turns to a completely different radio station playing old-timey music. He changes the channel and picks up a live baseball game. But as he listens, he realizes this is a game that was played back in 1967, 30 years earlier. Now Mel's curiosity is well and truly awakened, and when he talks to his neighbours, he learns a few interesting things about the hole. Firstly, the hole has been there for as long as anyone can remember. In fact, he hears rumours it could be centuries old. Secondly, no one has any idea who created the hole or why. But most disturbingly, the hole has the power to resurrect the dead. One of his neighbours tells Mel that after his dog died, he felt strangely compelled to drop the dog into the hole rather than bury it. Then a few days later, he was walking through the woods when he sees a dog that looks eerily familiar. He walks closer to the dog and notices it has the exact same collar and tag of his own dog, who passed away a short time ago. He's aware of the impossibility of the situation, but he can't stop himself calling out its name. It turns to face him, and his blood runs cold. There's no doubt about it. This isn't just some dog that looks the same. This is undeniably his dog that died a few days ago. And the hole has somehow brought it back to life. Except there is something different about it. In the words of Stephen King, sometimes dead is better. The dog then runs off into the woods, and he never sees it again. Mel now has more questions than answers, but he reasons that even if no one knows the age of the hole, he can at least find out its depth. He used to be a shark fisherman, so he has plenty of fishing lines stored away, and using an old fisherman's trick, he attaches a roll of lifesaver sweets to the end of the line and lowers them into the hole. If there is water in the hole, the lifesavers will dissolve. He lowers them to a depth of 1,500 feet and waits. He pulls them back up, but the sweets are untouched. Incredibly, that means there is no water at 1,500 feet, despite being well below the water table. Next, he attaches a lead weight to the end of the line and lowers it into the hole. It passes 1,500 feet, then 4,500 feet. He keeps adding more line, and the hole keeps going. 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 40,000 feet. By the time he reached the depth of 80,000 feet, or 15 miles, he's run out of line and still hasn't hit the bottom. Mel quickly realises that this is no ordinary hole. So on February 21st, 1997, he sends a fax to Art Bell, the host of Coast to Coast AM, asking for help. Coast to Coast AM is a late night radio show with a particular interest in the strange, unexplained, and all things that go bump in the night. All the best radio stations are, and it's the perfect place to discuss the strange hole. Later that evening, Mel Waters and Art Bell had the first of a series of on-air calls about the hole that got progressively more strange and disturbing as time went by. Mel explains that due to the recent snowstorms, he's out of town, but he went to the hole that night because he's worried that people will come looking for it after their call. Art reassures him that they won't reveal specifically where the hole is, but Mel contends that it won't be hard to find, because there aren't too many big holes in his neck of the woods, and there are at least 20 people who regularly use the hole. After Mel tells Art about the story with the resurrected dog, Art asks Mel if he would jump into the hole if he had a terminal illness. Mel says he would. In fact, he's left instructions in his will to have his body dropped into the hole after his death. Art asks if there's a risk his decomposing body could pollute the local water, but Mel reassures him that despite decades of who knows what being dropped into the hole, the water in the area has been tested and it's perfectly pure. Art then opens the floor to the audience, and several people call in with advice. Some suggest using radar or lasers to measure the depth of the hole, and one even volunteers to be lowered into it, although Mel isn't keen on the idea. He's concerned about the rope snapping, as well as other potential dangers, such as high temperatures, extreme air pressures, or toxic gases in the hole. Another caller suggests throwing a cat down into the hole and to listen for how long they can hear its cries. Unsurprisingly, Art isn't a fan of this. Art is amazed that no one has come to investigate the hole, and Mel explains that while his wife works at a local university, no one believed their story about the hole. At some point during the call, Mel asks if the depth of the hole could be some sort of world record, and a caller points out that the deepest trench in the ocean, the Mariana Trench, is 36,000 feet deep, and current mining technology could only go down 16,040 feet. In other words, Mel's hole was certainly a world record. The good news is that by the end of the call, Mel has a load of good advice on how to investigate the hole's depth. The bad news is that when Mel returned the following day, he found the entrance to his property blocked off by the military. Mel's concerns about someone finding the hole were confirmed. Somebody was listening the entire time.
But if they had, for instance, if they found like it was a drug lab, they could seize my property. After the show on Friday night, I went out there and noticed there were some helicopter activity around the property. There was further helicopter activity the next day. And so I figured that clearly somebody out there listens to your program.
Oh, yes.
Mel returns to the hole the day after the call is aired, but about a mile from his home, there's a roadblock consisting of trucks and armed guards. The only thing beyond this point is the hole, and he becomes immediately suspicious. When he asks one of the guards what's going on, he's told there's been a plane crash, and he's not allowed back on his property until an investigation into the crash has been completed. He looks over to where the guard indicates the crash has taken place, but there's no fire, no smoke. In fact, there's no indication that any crash had taken place at all. But there are tyre tracks leading past the guard and in the direction of the hole, and these tracks are those of some very heavy machinery. Mel demands to speak to the person in charge, and the guard brings back a man dressed in civilian clothes who simply repeats everything the guard just told him. Mel knows something else is going on, but when he starts to complain, the man in civilian clothes cuts him off and calmly tells him that right now it's not his property, and if he doesn't leave, it would be very easy to find a drug lab on the property. Mel does have a lab of sorts. It's nothing illegal. He uses it as part of his work cultivating plants for alternative medicines traditionally used by Native American tribes. But he also knows how easy it would be for them to turn that into something illicit. He threatens to go to the press, but the man in civilian clothes offers him a crooked smile and says, "Go ahead, no one will believe you," before turning his back and saying, "We'll be in touch." Mel asks if they'll need his contact details, to which the man replies, "Don't you worry, Mr. Waters, we already have them." Now unable to access his own property, Mel's forced to rely on neighbours for updates, and it isn't long until a neighbour describes seeing something strange. It turns out that the night after Mel's encounter with the military, a neighbour saw a beam of dark light shoot up through the clouds. It was a beam of pure black, darker than anything they had ever seen, and it was coming from where the hole was. Another neighbour who'd lived in the area for over 50 years told Mel that the hole was once surrounded by a series of large stone columns. Think Stonehenge, but without the stones across the top. With nowhere else to turn, Mel once more calls Art Bell with an update. He sounds audibly upset, and during the call he points out how strange it is that the supposed airplane crash was never reported in the papers. But this doesn't surprise him. He knew the crash was a cover story. In addition to the dark lights, neighbours have also seen trucks carrying generators and temporary huts in the direction of the hole. It doesn't look like the military are going anywhere anytime soon. Callers offer their own theories, ranging from ley lines, portals to another dimension, or the tunnels to the hollow earth. Then a caller ominously warns Mel that calling into the show is a big mistake, because it's obvious that the government is listening. Nonetheless, the show continues, and as Art Bell wraps up, Mel agrees to call back with an update a short time later. Except, Mel doesn't turn up for the scheduled call, and he's not answering his phone. From this point, Mel's story takes a much darker turn.
All of my back teeth have been removed.
What?
I have no back teeth.
You have no back teeth?
None.
You don't mean like...
no molars, no wisdom teeth.
You're not talking about wisdom teeth. You're talking about...
None. No back teeth. None on top, none on bottom.
Why would they take your teeth
I
out?
have no idea, Art.
It's 3 years until Mel reappears, and in that time, he's been living in Australia running a wombat sanctuary, as well as continuing his work with alternative medicines. It turns out that shortly after the last call, the government approached Mel with a very generous offer to lease his land for $250,000 a month. But there was a catch. He had to sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave the country immediately. He was even allowed to take his dogs and plants with him, but under no circumstances could he ever return to the United States. He takes the deal, and for a while, things are going well. But he starts to miss his family, and despite the warnings, decides to come home. This was a huge mistake. As soon as he returns to America, he's served with papers suing him for illegal construction. Things like septic tanks, power lines, and paved roads on his property. And because this is a breach of the contracted terms, all payments will be stopped with immediate effect. Obviously, he didn't build these, so he calls his now ex-wife to ask her about it. But he can't get hold of her. In fact, she's completely disappeared. He then finds out that all his sanctuaries and research institutions back in Australia have been shut down, and all the workers have been laid off. Then when he checks his bank accounts, all the money has gone. While this was all happening, Mel stayed in touch with Art Bell via email, and they agreed for Mel to return to the show and tell his listeners all about it. But when it's time for Mel's slot, he doesn't show up. The reason for his absence is the most unsettling part of the story so far. So it's the day Mel's due to appear on the show, and he's helping his nephew move apartment. He's just dropped off a hire truck and is on the bus back to Olympia when things take a sudden and dramatic turn. A fight breaks out between two passengers. It gets so bad that the driver is forced to pull over and call the police. The police turn up a short time later and question the passengers about what happened. Mel tells them he needs to get back to Olympia as soon as possible, so they agree to give him a lift back and ask questions along the way. But as soon as Mel steps into the waiting transit van, everything goes black. He wakes up in an alley in San Francisco 12 days later, with the taste of blood in his mouth. He feels around the back of his mouth and realizes that he's missing teeth. But it's not one or two. All of his back teeth have been removed. Wisdom teeth and molars. Every single one of them. His ID, wallet, keys, and even belt buckle are missing. And as he slowly regains his senses, he notices that his arm aches. So he rolls up his sleeve and finds a piece of tape and needle marks in his arm. It looks like some sort of IV has been there. He's only able to get home after getting in touch with his nephew, who buys him a bus ticket. As soon as he gets back, he contacts Art Bell to explain what happened and arranges to come back on the show. Art asks Mel if that's a good idea. He thinks everything that's happened to Mel since his return could be a threat or a warning. But Mel's not convinced. Besides, he's 68 years old now, and he still wants answers. There are several people who've taken items from the property, and he wants to get back in touch with them and have the items tested. He's come to believe that the ground around the hole contains mystical properties, and he wants to see if these properties have been transferred to those items.
Maybe my audience is not aware, but a television crew went up to Ellensburg after we did the last program and researched this. And I'll be doggone, they didn't find the hole, but they did find near the area where you were talking about a lot of military boot prints and all kinds of information that would indicate the military, in fact, had been there or was there.
Oh, they would have probably seen a lot of yellow gear tread marks in the ground.
By now, people are becoming suspicious of Mel's story. But Art Bell gave it some much needed credibility when he confirms that a television crew recently went to the area Mel described. And while they don't find the hole, they find significant evidence of military activity, and that a no-fly zone has been mysteriously expanded to cover the area. Now, while this is strange, that on its own doesn't prove the government were trying to cover anything up. But then Mel said something that changed everything. He asks Art if he's familiar with TerraServer, which was a precursor to Google Earth, and he said he was. He told Art that the area where his property is has been censored out. And when Art checks for himself, he sees a huge white rectangle blocking off exactly where Mel's land is. Skeptical callers suggest that Mel has just found a whited out part of the map and is just pretending this is his property. The problem with this is that Mel said his property was in that location 8 months before Terror Server was even launched. He couldn't possibly have known that Terror Server would have censored this area when it went live 8 months after the initial call. As the call goes on, Mel seems fixated on the belt buckle that was stolen during his blackout in San Francisco. Art finds this strange. Of all the things Mel's had taken from him, his wallet, his property, even his teeth, why is he so concerned about a belt buckle? The Mel tells him that one day, while digging on his land, he finds a red Chinese lucky money envelope with 10 dimes inside. He thinks of it as nothing more than an unusual find. With all the strange phenomena surrounding the hole, 10 dimes in an envelope seems pretty near the bottom. Now around this time, he's making belt buckles to sell at the local farmer's market. So he makes 10 belt buckles, each with one of the dimes in them. He sells 9 and keeps 1 for himself. And it's the belt buckle he kept for himself that was stolen from him in San Francisco. Again, strange, but it isn't until he bumps into an old friend shortly before coming on the show that he realises the significance of the dimes he found in the envelope. The friend had bought a belt buckle with one of those dimes a while back, and as they were talking, the friend asked Mel about a strange detail on the dime. The dime in the belt buckle had a Franklin Roosevelt head, but it was dated as being struck in 1943. This was impossible. Roosevelt didn't die until 1945, and the dime featuring his head wasn't in circulation until 1946. The friend thinks it's a misprint, or perhaps a limited coin of some sort. Either way, he's sure that it would be worth a lot of money to coin collectors. So he takes the coin to a coin dealer for valuation, and they immediately offer to buy it from him. He suspects that the coin is worth far more than he's being offered, so he declines the offer and takes it home with him. The next day, he hears a knock at his door. There's 2 people standing there, claiming to be from the Treasury. They confiscate the dime, and he never sees it again. One of the callers suggests that perhaps the hole is a portal to another dimension, one in which Roosevelt died an earlier death, and perhaps this is why the hole never fills up. Mel then says that his trucker friends have told him about some unusual deliveries they've been making to a warehouse near the property. These included huge quantities of fibre optic cable and specialist instruments. What makes this unusual is that the deliveries were taken from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in San Francisco, California. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory works on projects for the US military, and it was in San Francisco that Mel woke up after being abducted. The truckers went on to describe the men receiving the deliveries as Israeli. By now, Mel's lost everything: his money, his property, his wife, even his teeth. But his story is far from over. And that's when he gets to the main reason he's called back. He's found another bottomless hole. At this point, a skeptical caller asks what the odds were of someone finding 2 bottomless holes. But Mel explains that after one of his calls on the show, a group of Native Americans in Nevada emailed him. They wanted to know more about his work with plants to make alternative medicines. So he travels to Nevada to meet them, and it turns out they also do a lot of work with plants and alternative medicines. During the conversation, Mel describes a plant that has exceptionally powerful healing properties, and asks if they're familiar with it. They say they are. Mel's initially sceptical, because, as far as he knows, the plant he described only grows around the hole on his property. But he doesn't tell them that. But as it turns out, he doesn't need to, because when he asks the Native Americans where they found their plants, they tell him about the second hole, and Mel realises this is the real reason they invited him down. It turns out that the second hole isn't located on the Indian reservation, but on an area of land inhabited by the Basque, an ethnic group from a small region between France and Spain, who settled in the area in the mid-1800s to herd and rear sheep. The Native Americans introduce Mel to the Basque, and they take him to the hole. The Basque explain that the hole has been there for as long as their people have lived in the area, which is at least 200 years, and they regard the hole and its surrounding land as sacred. On first glance, the hole is the same as the one on Mel's property. It's 9 feet wide, seemingly bottomless, animals are scared of it, and it occasionally emits a black beam into the sky. But there are some significant differences. Instead of a stone retaining wall, this one is surrounded by a metal collar about 2 foot high, and the metal lining extends into the hole as far as the eye can see. The air around the hole is warm, heavy and thick, like it's electrically charged, and it was like this year-round. In fact, some of the Basque people camped around the hole in winter to keep warm. But it isn't just the air that's warm. The metal around the hole is surrounded by a field of warmth, despite being cool to the touch. But the strangest detail about the second hole is its noise-cancelling properties. With Mel's hole, you can't hear echoes or objects hitting the bottom. But with the second hole, you can't hear any sounds from directly above it. And if you hit the metal rim with an object, it won't make any noise. It won't even vibrate from the impact. Mel saw this for himself when he accidentally dropped a wrench on the metal collar, and it landed soundlessly. Mel and the Basque agree to do some experiments. Mel's particularly intrigued by the strange temperate properties of the hole, so they get 2 buckets of ice. They lower 1 bucket of ice 1,500 feet into the hole and keep the second bucket of ice on the surface as a control. Once the bucket of ice on the surface is half melted, they pull up the ice in the hole for comparison. Incredibly, the ice they lowered into the hole hasn't melted at all. Mel picks up the ice and it's completely dry and warm to the touch. In fact, it now feels like large salt crystals. They try to melt the transformed ice over an open flame, but rather than melting it, it catches fire and burns for months. One of the men ends up taking the burning ice and uses it to warm their cabin. They repeat the experiment a few more times, but the ice was only transformed 1/3 of the time. The rest of the time, the ice melts normally. By now, they're convinced that the hole has transformative properties, and they decide they want to experiment with something larger, something more complex than frozen water. One of the men volunteers to be lowered into the hole, but they eventually agree to send down a sheep instead. Now this next part is the most disturbing and unsettling part of the whole story, and one of the strangest things I've ever heard. But it also contains depictions of animal cruelty, so I've included timestamps if you want to skip it.
I have no idea what the heck this thing is, okay? And then this thing separated from the tumor without our assistance. We thought, well, maybe we we'll cut this thing free.
Right there on the table.
It's right there, and it moved about a little on the table.
Yeah.
You know, so we're all standing back at that point because this thing is loose, you know.
I'd be way back.
The sheep starts panicking as soon as it nears the hole. The closer they get, the more violently the sheep resists, until a Basque man hits the sheep between the eyes and stuns it for long enough for the men to put the sheep in the crate they were going to lower into the hole. The sheep comes to just before they get to the hole and desperately tries to break out of the crate. Then, as they raise the crate, the sheep releases the most blood-curdling scream Mel has ever heard. But as soon as the men position the crate over the hole, all the noise the sheep was making suddenly stops. The sheep is still desperately trying to escape, but the hole is somehow blocking the sound of its struggles. They slowly lower the crate, and while they can't hear anything, they can see the crate shaken violently and bashing against the sides of the hole. They lower the crate deeper into the darkness until it is out of sight. They can still feel it struggling on the line, but when they drop it to around 1,000 feet, the sheep suddenly stops moving, and in its place, they feel a strange humming sensation moving up the line, followed by a static charge in the air. They leave the sheep down in the hole for another 30 minutes, and when they bring it up, everything looks normal. The crate is intact, and the sheep looks untouched, but it's not moving, and one of the Basque men confirms that it's dead. The Basque, being shepherds, know how to butcher a sheep, and they begin an autopsy. But as soon as they cut into the carcass, they notice something strange. The sheep looks like it's been cooked from the inside. But the most disturbing thing was a giant gel-covered tumour that almost fills the entire inside of the sheep. Then the tumour starts to pulsate. There's something moving, something living inside the tumour. They slowly cut open the tumour, and inside they find an 18-inch long creature attached to it by some sort of umbilical cord. The creature looks like a baby seal, but with one unsettling difference. It has the eyes of a human. The creature disconnects itself from the umbilical cord and stares at the men. One of the men says they should kill it, but the rest disagree. They stare back at the creature, entranced, and Mel suddenly feels he's in the presence of something miraculous.
And then I felt, I just felt I was in the presence of something extraordinary, something beyond extraordinary, something like in that category of having a religious thing. This was just such a stunning thing to witness.
It crawls to the edge of the table, then looks up at Mel. And although Mel doesn't know why, he feels an unspoken connection with the creature, and picks it up and places it on the ground. The creature is covered in the same gel substance that surrounded the tumour, and leaves a slimy residue on Mel's hands that smells of ozone. The creature continues to stare up at the men, and the men stare back, mesmerised and fascinated by the intelligence behind its eyes. At no point do any of the men feel threatened by the creature. In fact, its gaze is one of pure compassion and kindness, unlike anything they've ever seen before, and it lulls them into a trance-like state of calm and relaxation. They stay like this for nearly 2 hours. Then the creature starts to crawl towards the hole. Mel is once more compelled to help the creature, so he picks it up and places it on the metal collar surrounding the hole. The creature gives the men a slow nod, then turns around and jumps back into the hole. The men eventually decide to drop the remains of the sheep and tumour back into the hole. But things were far from over. That evening, Mel's talking to a Basque elder about their experience with the creature. The elder tells him that he isn't surprised, as their people have always known that the hole has spiritual powers. Then he smiles and places something in Mel's hand and tells him to put it away. Mel puts it in his pocket and the elder retires to bed. It isn't long until curiosity gets the better of him, and Mel reaches into his pocket and pulls out what the elder gave him. It's a little red envelope. A red Chinese lucky money envelope, to be exact. And inside is a single 1943 Franklin Roosevelt dime. The same sort of 1943 dime he found in his own hole, over 800 miles away. Before Mel went to Nevada, he was diagnosed with a late-stage esophageal cancer and only given 6 months to live. But when he returns home for a checkup with his oncologist, he's told he's now cancer-free. The oncologist has no explanation for Mel's miraculous recovery, but Mel is sure it is something to do with touching the strange seal-like creature. But before the audience can ask any more questions, the show runs out of time. Mel returns to Coast a few months later, and he tells Art Bell about something insane that happened with the burning ice. It turns out that shortly after one of the Basque men takes the burning ice to his cabin, he notices that the air is constantly dry. Not only that, but he's always thirsty, and his skin is dry and flaky, and when he boils water over the ice, the steam is pulled into it. It's like the ice is somehow absorbing all the moisture from the air. Then one day he comes home, and the stove, still with the ice inside, has crashed through the floor of the cabin. When he inspects the hole, he sees it's already a foot deep, but despite this, it's still giving off heat, so he continues to use it to warm the home. That's until he comes home 2 weeks later and finds his entire cabin has collapsed and turned to dust. It looks like all the moisture has been sucked out of it. With nowhere else to go, he moves in with his brother, but when he returns a month later, he sees the stove is now 5 feet underground, and the edges of the hole are as smooth as glass. It looks like the start of another bottomless hole. The man contacts Mel and tells him about what's happening. Mel decides to get back in touch with one of his official contacts from when he was living in Australia. The contact becomes worried as soon as he hears the story, and insists on knowing where the cabin is and how to get there. When the cabin owner returns to the site of his former cabin later that day, he's shocked to see a team of men already there. He can't tell if they're scientists or military, or a combination of the two. But whoever they are, they've brought a lot of heavy-duty construction equipment with them. He hides in a nearby hill and watches as the men struggle to remove the stove. It was only with the combination of chains and multiple cranes that they were finally able to hoist it out of the ground. They then hauled it away on the largest truck he had ever seen. Mel explains that prior to this, helicopters had been seen flying over the site of the second hole, and he's starting to get the feeling that he's being followed. Apparently, whenever he wants to talk to someone, they mysteriously turn up, even though he's very hard to find. It's because of this he's decided he won't visit the second hole again, just in case he leads the wrong people right to it. His concerns about people finding the second hole starts to come into focus when he explains that the Basque were now being visited by the seal-like entity that came from the hole. In fact, it communicates with them over radios and speakers using a system of beeps and clicks that the Basque are able to understand. But the reason the creature is communicating with them is to warn them that the ice is dangerous, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it would destroy the world. The creature also warns of intelligent beings from other bleak realities who are waiting for humanity to destroy itself through nuclear war, and then take over and use the ice on the planet. The ice reminds Mel of the fictional substance Ice 9, described in Kurt Vonnegut's book Cat's Cradle. Ice 9 was a form of water molecule that freezes at a high temperature and could freeze all water on Earth and turn people into statues. Up to this point, Mel hasn't been able to provide any photos or recordings, and when Art asks him about this, Mel explains that whenever he tried to take a photo of the 1943 Franklin dime, it didn't show up on film, and that both the dime and hole in Nevada become invisible to the naked eye if you stand a certain distance away from them. Nonetheless, Mel agrees to try to take photos and even a recording of the entity talking through the radio, as well as any other evidence he can get his hands on. And with that, the show ends. Mel is never heard from again. He doesn't answer Art's calls, and the line is eventually disconnected. This was the end of one of the most incredible stories ever captured on radio. And after 5 years, Mel and his hole disappear forever. When I first started researching this story, it sounded like some crazy combination of A Doorway to Hell and Stephen King's Pet Sematary. But no matter how weird I thought this story would be, nothing prepared me for just how far off the rails this thing went. It's no surprise that the story of Mel's Hole has left such an indelible legacy, and debate about the existence of Mel's Hole continues to this day. But with all that said, let's review what really happens. I think the best place to start is with what we can confirm, because unfortunately there isn't much. There are no photos of either of the holes or the 1943 Roosevelt dimes, or anything else to support Mel's claims. There are no medical reports to support him having cancer and being miraculously cured. There are no dental reports to support his claims of having his teeth removed. In fact, there is no evidence that anyone called Mel Waters ever existed, although it would be understandable if he used a pseudonym to protect his identity. There is, however, a detail in his story that could explain his choice of pseudonym. Mel Waters claimed to use plants to make traditional Native American medicine, and it turns out that Mel Waters is an anagram of water elms, which are a plant used in traditional Native American medicine. It may just be a coincidence, but I think it's an interesting little detail to add. On one of the calls, Art Bell confirms that a television crew found tracks leading to where Mel's hole was reportedly located, but they didn't find the hole. And without the hole, we're just left with tracks on a parcel of land, which isn't enough to prove the hole's existence. The best evidence we have for the existence of the hole is the whited out area on Terra server. For all the inconsistencies, and there are a lot, which I will come to shortly, there is one detail which makes the story so compelling. During one of the first calls, Mel described an area where the hole was located, and this exact area was sensed on Terra server when it went live 8 months later. It could just have been a technical glitch, but it's a remarkable coincidence. Unsurprisingly, people have been searching for the hole for years. During one of Mel's calls, he described 2 old buildings, one of which had collapsed under snow, which were near a hole surrounded by a stone retaining wall. Then one day, someone found a piece of land matching this description, and in addition to the 2 buildings, they found a stone retaining wall as well as a hole about 9 foot wide. People were saying that this was proof of Mel's hole, but unfortunately it turned out to be nothing more mysterious than an abandoned old well. Geologists have pointed out that a hole as deep as the one Mel described couldn't possibly exist. It would simply collapse in on itself, and if Mel was sending fishing line down 88,000 feet, the heat from the earth would certainly melt the line. But then again, if the hole was a portal to another dimension, then these limitations wouldn't apply. But what really hurts the credibility of the story is the complete lack of pictures. In every call, Art Bell asks for photos or recordings, and Mel always has an excuse. Either the camera didn't work, the artifacts wouldn't show up on film, he needed to ask permission first, or he simply forgot. But one of the things that struck me while listening to the calls are some of the inconsistencies in his story. There's quite a lot to go into here, but please, indulge me. In the first call, Mel describes the hole as something akin to the community rubbish dump, with at least 20 people regularly using it. Yet, somehow, no one has ever been able to say where the hole is. Mel's hole is arguably the most famous hole in America, a paranormal version of the Grand Canyon, so it's inconceivable that not a single local has come forward to say where it is. In his third call, he says the government leased his property for $250,000 a month, but he's later told that due to construction on the property, he's in breach of the lease agreement. This makes no sense. If you rent a property from your landlord and you start construction on their house, you can't then accuse them of being in breach of the lease agreement and refuse to pay your rent. In his final call, he talks about being worried about people finding the second hole on the Basque people's land, but then he also says that he told his official contact the location of the cabin where the stove fell through the floor. Once officials found the location of the cabin, it wouldn't be hard to search the rest of the area and find the second hole. He tells Art that when he returned to America, his now ex-wife has disappeared, but just leaves it there. There's no mention of reporting her as a missing person, or any real attempts to search for her. In fact, he seems more concerned with his missing belt buckles. And the story, however crazy, seems to loosely parallel what's being talked about on the radio show and the books he reads. In the first call, Mel suggests he's worried about someone finding his hole, and in the next call, the government has found his hole. One caller volunteers to go down the hole, and another says to throw a cat down there. Then Mel talks about visiting the Basque, and a man volunteers to go into the hole, and they lower a sheep into the hole. One caller suggests that the hole may have something to do with time travel or alternative realities, and Mel finds coins dated 1943 to indicate an alternative reality in which Roosevelt died at a different time. On the final call, Mel directly references the book Cat's Cradle, which is a story about a scientist who, after a nuclear weapon was dropped on Hiroshima, discovers a magical ice compound that destroys the world. Then Mel talks about the seal creature giving warnings about humanity destroying itself with nuclear weapons, and that the ice has the power to destroy the world. One of the main protagonists in Cat's Cradle, Papa Monzano, had terminal cancer. Mel says he also had terminal cancer, although he was miraculously cured. I'm aware this is all starting to sound a bit cynical, but I feel these are important considerations when reviewing the story, and a common argument is that he simply dropped the hoax when he couldn't keep it up. But in Mel's defence, if this was a hoax, he doesn't make a profit from it. He doesn't write a book or try to sell merchandise, and despite Art Bell and sceptical callers trying to trip him up, no one is able to catch him out. It's also important to remember that this went on for over 5 years, which is an absurd amount of patience and dedication to put into a hoax with no payoff at the end. The final theory is that there was some kind of cover-up, and that the first 2 calls were Mel, and he took the money and settled in Australia. But when the story of Mel's holes persisted, a second person called in pretending to be Mel, and attempted to discredit the entire story by introducing the more wild and fantastical elements. Remember, it was only when Mel returns from Australia that we hear about him being abducted, finding a second hole with transformative properties, and spiritual seal creatures spilling out the tumours of dead sheep. It's a steep escalation from what we hear in the first 2 calls, and the voice does sound slightly different in these later calls. But then again, he says his back teeth have been removed, so perhaps that's to be expected. Or maybe it's just a convenient cover story. The reason stories like this endure and fascinate is because they contain that little nugget of information that forces us to ask, what if? And the what if in this story stems from the area censored by TerraServer. What are the odds of the exact area of land Mel described his whole being on being censored by TerraServer when it went live 8 months later? I can't help but ask, what if there really was something being censored? And when I listen to the calls, Mel sounds authentic. But whether the story of Mel's hole was real, or Mel simply believed it to be real, is another matter. That's all from Paranormal FM. Thank you for spending your evening with me. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks again, and be sure to join me next time.